Listen, can you hear voices coming from the old mill? Can you hear the soft swoosh of phantom sails spinning in the wind? The clickety-clack of grain being ground from the silent stone. The running water over a disused wheel. The millwright, the wheelwright, the carpenter, the trades of a mill, long forgotten crafts for long forgotten people. Powered by wind and rain, these magnificent structures strode across the landscape for centuries, Don Quixote's giants, the pinnacle of technology of the day. Listen carefully and you might hear voices from generations past, communicating with the future to preserve today's heritage. But are they voices or just ghosts in the machine? Hi, and welcome to National Mills Weekend 2026. We've got a packed programme for you, so let's see what's coming up. We explore the endangered craft of millwrighting. We have sourdough baking. We look at mills now and then, and down at the Mills Archive, we chat about the millwrighting firm of Holman Brothers of Canterbury. But first, a word from Mildred.
Welcome everyone to National Mills Weekend 2026. The Society of Protection of Ancient Buildings, known as the SPAB Mills section, runs this every year, and it's a good chance for everybody to go around the country and see mills working, both corn mills, also all different industrial mills as well. So it's a good opportunity this year. And also you see mills that are not normally open to the public. So that's another great advantage as well. And there's many untold stories from the past that we would like to hear about, and for those involved in the mills themselves, from all types of milling. And we need to get a complete picture of this around the whole country. But at the heart of it are our millwrights, and without them, we wouldn't have mills. People to look after them, repair them. We have professional millwrights and we have volunteer millwrights. And passing on the skills is so important. You can read things in a book, but you don't get the full picture unless you've got your actually hands-on for it. And both the SPAB this year has got fellows and scholars, and the fellows are the ones that do the hands-on work. And this year we have a millwright fellow, Hannah B, who will be working with professional millwrights around the country and also helping at working mills to get a feel for how a mill actually works, to see it in action. And hopefully at the end of the 9 months, she will then be taken on by one of the larger millwright companies to carry on and learn a trade. She's a carpenter by trade herself, so she's got a good background to start with, and there's lots of wood repairs needed in mills as well. The Mills Archive are also doing a project which we'll talk about perhaps at a different time. I think the actual SPAB was actually set up many years ago by a gentleman called Rex Wales. In fact, the SPAB goes back further than that, to 1877, to William Morris, whose concern over repair of old buildings. And in 1926, the Daily Mail was receiving information from readers saying, what's happening to our windmills? They're all disappearing. And gentleman called Rex Wales picked this up and decided, through working with the Ministry of Works, he's an engineer, would go around looking at mills around the country and record them all. The result of which he wrote many books and information leaflets, and he was particularly concerned about millwrights as well. And in his book, there's a phrase which I'll read, two short phrases. The first was, where are we? The millwrights who built these mills and harnessed the wind for the use of man were the ancestors in trade of the modern mechanical engineers. Survivals of their work should interest all who delight in the fine achievements of the past, both those who are interested in machinery as well as those who delight to see a windmill as part of the landscape. And then he went on to say, really, he was quite concerned, and I hope that my efforts will receive practical support and encouragement, both material and moral, from all who read this book. And today, millwrights are an endangered craft, and we're desperately trying to recruit more millwrights into the trade. It is not easy, it's a hard job, and we need to move on this fairly quickly, because a lot of the established firms now, the millwrights are getting older and near retirement, and younger people need to come forward to take their place. So enjoy National Mills Weekend and enjoy all the mills that you see. Thank you.
So this is Nutley Mill. It's a wonderful example of an early type of windmill. In this case, an open trestle post mill, and one of only 5 remaining in the country, and this one is still capable of grinding. And the people who built Nutley, the carpenters, the tradesmen, the wheelwrights, the ironworkers, the blacksmiths, they became known as millwrights. And collectively, millwrights went on to build mills throughout the land, from post mills to smock mills to tower mills. However, with the rise of roller milling and the decline of the traditional mill, millwrighting and the millwrighting skills and knowledge are in danger of being lost as a trade and as a heritage craft. There are now very few people and firms who can call themselves millwrights, and we wanted to look at this endangered sector of our industrial heritage and find out what can be done to preserve that knowledge and to encourage new entrants into the business. Milling, that is the grinding of grain to produce a suitable flour, has been going on for thousands of years, at least as long as grain cultivation. But it was only when specialist buildings were used for that purpose that the millwright first appeared. Those early mill buildings, especially the early windmills of Europe, were mostly constructed in wood, and so it was to the crafts of wood and wooden building skills that the first millers turned to when constructing a mill.
I've done work on 4 millwrights on quite a lot of mills all over the place, and really it's transferable skills. It's all cutting and measuring and cutting.
So it was from individual crafts and traditional skills that the millwright emerged as the go-to person who could and had to utilise these skills in order to construct and maintain a mill. And even in today's environment, the millwright Paul Kemp says,
it's not just a simple job. Certainly with millwrighting, it's a number of varying skills, and you've got to be fairly good at each one. And the basic qualification for millwrighting is engineering. If you haven't got the engineering brain, then don't go near millwrighting, because it's not for you.
However, millwrighting, like other specialist craft and heritage skills, is facing an uncertain future.
The reality of the picture for crafts like millwrighting is that they're actually much more of a network or of an ecosystem of connected trades and crafts. So with lots of different things that affect them, so sourcing of raw materials, obsolete technologies, there's all those things that contribute to these crafts becoming more endangered.
So from about 10,000 millwrights in 1851, today we have about 14 to 20 professionals and firms, with a small but important number of suitably qualified amateur millwrights who look after their local mill.
Certainly with voluntary groups that we've got active in this country that look after windmills and do their little bits of DIY each week, 99% of the time they do a fairly good job.
1, 2, 3.
Yep. Right.
Stop.
Yeah, right.
And I find I've been involved with White Mill Sandwich now for about 10 years. Their volunteers have all come from engineering backgrounds, so they're very, very lucky, and they're all retired carpenters and engineers. They have managed to pretty much restore the mill back to working order without a great deal of my input. And it boosts you, really, you know, to think that they took a mill apart, repaired it, and I helped put it back together, and it works, and it worked first time. But there comes a time occasionally where they do get things wrong, and then they start contacting people who do know, and you give them that little bit of advice and you boost them up again.
With the gain in interest of preserving mills in particular, led by Rex Wales and the SPAB Mills section, many mills up and down the country have been saved for future generations by local groups, but this in turn has led to a problem of maintenance and restoration, as there is a lack of new millwrights coming into the craft.
There is more than enough work because there is a shortage of millwrights. When I started my company up, I got one project in, and then 2 months into that project, another one came in, and then whilst I started that one and was planning that one, another one came in. So, and it's been consistent. And I was in a situation fairly early on where I had 5 fairly large projects going at the same time. And then you're into a juggling exercise, then you have to keep everybody happy.
Although this might be superficially good, when digging a little deeper, problems start to appear.
Putting 3 sets of sails up since the beginning of July to the end of September. Usually I might get 1 set to put up or take down a year, but doing 3 sets in 2 months, and working for other projects as well, it was quite a challenge for me.
One of the problems is the length of time to train a new millwright.
If a mill has a problem, if it's simple, okay, it can be done. Millwright can turn up a couple of days or a week, say, and repair it. But if it's a major job, quite often it gets left to 6 months or a year before it can be done, because the millwright's books are all fully booked up for the next 12 months. So that mill's got to wait for 12 months, in which time more rot sets in, as it were. So it's not a happy prospect at the moment, but it's getting better.
So certainly in the next 5 to 10 years, I would like to see 20 or so people trained up, really, to get us out of a hole, and we are in a bit of a hole.
The more millwrights we can get, the better. We need another 10 at least, and then I'd feel a bit more comfortable, I think.
This shortage of professional millwrights has led to the Heritage Crafts charity putting it onto its red list of endangered crafts.
Well, the Red List started as a project 10 years ago now, because we have always tried to be an evidence-based organisation, so a data-driven organisation, and we felt that we'd done some economic research, but nobody really has, and still don't really officially have a picture of how many craft practitioners there are in the UK, or heritage crafts practitioners. So there's a vague notion that crafts are dying out, and people were telling us that they're dying out and that we were losing these craft skills, but we didn't actually know the scale or the scope of those issues. So we set about starting up the Red List in order to find out. And I don't think we ever imagined it would become what it is today, which is a really important advocacy tool for heritage crafts. But it has become that, and it's become really well known, and it's been very impactful in its messaging.
Most people, being that it's a multi-skilled subject as well, will tend to walk away. I mean, working in conditions either in where it's very, very wet, at height, in windy conditions, that puts people off. The challenges that you're up against as well, working under time constraints to get projects finished.
Writing in his book Windmills in England, Rex Wales appeals to the future. It will be necessary to initiate an energetic apprenticeship scheme to ensure that the race of millwrights does not die out with the present generation. If the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings takes the lead in such matters, it should have the fullest possible support from all those who have an interest in the windmills of England. Do you think that you have lived up to Rex Wales's plea to the future?
I'd like to think so, but I'm not absolutely 100% certain about that. I think if Rex were here today, he'd be flapping his wings and saying, "Come on, we've got to do more, we've got to do more." You know, but if we can get millwrights trained, more mills can be looked after and saved, which is what we're trying to do. The Society for Protection of Ancient Buildings runs this course, a fellowship, and one of them, usually out of the 4, takes on millwrighting. And they do 9 months working with millwrights and working with volunteers and working at working mills to get an overall 9-month picture. And then hopefully at the end of that, one of the millwrights will take them on as an apprentice to carry on and then eventually go off on their own. But it's hard life. It's not easy. You've got to be passionate about it, otherwise there's no point.
So, what can be done to address this problem? Well, in Holland, for example, they have a different experience.
Over there, they are tripping over each other. So a lot of millwrights will have other skills like steeplejacking, boat building, etc., etc., because there's so many of them over there. But then you look at what they've got and the state of their windmills, 90% of them are in very, very good order. So there are very few unrestored examples out in Holland.
We really try to promote that the mills we have are a collection of 1,200 very specific, very beautiful mills. We really want that the public and the stakeholders know that this collection should remain as it is, and we should have enough funding to do so, and enough people to do so, and enough millwrights to do so. And that realization that the mill is more than stones and wood, huh? A mill is more than that. It's also all the intangible stuff around it. And the miller is placed on the list of UNESCO in 2017, which also says it's important to keep this craft of the miller alive, and also that you need working mills. And working mills means mills with access to wind or access to water, with enough people who run it and enough knowledge to do it the right way.
Back in the UK, there is a revival in heritage.
What I hear a lot from particularly older makers is that young people are not interested, which I don't buy at all, because I think they are. I think they're just engaging in different ways. So it's our job and it's our responsibility to make sure that we are engaging with them, because they can't be interested in something they don't know about.
And what sort of appeals to you about working on a windmill?
It's something different, something completely different to anything else. So you're out here, first of all, you're in the fresh air, which is nice, but you're out here meeting people and getting involved and opening something for everybody to enjoy, basically. So it's nice just to be a part of that. At the end of the day, these aren't everywhere. You don't really see them around, even though there's quite a few preserved around, but you know, it's something a bit different for everybody to enjoy.
I've got one lad who works for me who's interested, you know, and I suppose really what's stopping, you know, the fact that he's working for me is stopping me taking somebody else on. I think that other people are out there that would be interested.
Is it something that is worth preserving?
Oh, definitely. There's enough mills around that as long as they're kept in good condition will last for another 200 or 300 years. You know, there's nothing wrong with them. It is just general maintenance, of which some of it can be done by volunteers, but you still need the millwright to do the more intricate work.
We often talk about heritage crafts as very important to our intangible cultural heritage in the UK. So that is all the aspects of our heritage that can't be put in a museum, put on a plinth. They're things that need the human in order to enact them. And as we lose these skills, maybe losing one, I mean, you know, maybe that wouldn't have so much impact. But But if you see that range of diversity of skills and knowledge that's held in all 285 crafts that we currently identify, that's a huge amount of cultural knowledge, diverse knowledge, niche knowledge. It's really important that we can recognise that. So that's part of it. I think also crafts are really important for our sense of who we are, for our sense of identity, for our well-being with millwrighting. It's very hard to call that balance between the demands, the needs of the sector and the pipeline of people to get to that stage, because obviously we need a pipeline, but it's not very many people. So, and it's a highly specialised and technical occupation. So getting that balance right of not training people without promise of any viable work at the end of it, which we also have to be mindful of, because it's not responsible to go to young people and say, be a millwright, if we don't know that there are enough jobs and opportunities to support them in their jobs. So we have to call that balance between the needs and demands of that heritage that does need those professionals.
I think how I see the future is it's quite difficult, because it all depends on millwrights, people wanting to train to be millwrights, and there's no apprenticeships anymore, which is very sad. And we've had ups and downs throughout the years. We've had, in the 1950s, lots of mills were being lost. There was no millwrights. And then it came back again. And in the last 20 or 30 years, lots of mills have been repaired thanks to millwrights. And without them, you know, they would not be there today. And I think it's a very rewarding experience being a millwright. It's hard work, long hours sometimes, but I think at the end of the day, most of them feel they've done a good job at the end of the day and helped preserve some of British heritage, as it were, for everyone to enjoy and see. And their names will go down in history, I'm sure, because they're a great band of people, both the bigger firms and the one-man bands. The one-man bands have got more difficulties, that they can't take on huge jobs, but sometimes they work with others as well. So that's nice. They can call on other people to do the bits that they can't do, perhaps, as well. So working together is also a good thing. And I think the future is looking good. Let's hope.
This windmill we're sitting in, which is Windmill Hill, the windmill at Windmill Hill, have started an amazing project and invited the community to plant a square metre of wheat in their gardens. 1 square metre of wheat will make 1 sourdough loaf. And that is a wonderful way of seeing the whole process, from planting wheat in the soil, milling the wheat at the mill, and then making your own sourdough bread with your own hands, with your own starter.
The people who run the mill asked me, as a smallholder who grows his own wheat, if I'd get involved with their Bake Your Lawn project, which they're doing this year, which is a great sounding project. I grow wheat for myself on a very small scale. So I said yes, and so we've been doing that today. There's always been smallholders, and there's always been farmers. I guess if you go back far enough, most people were just subsistence farmers, which, you know, in Saxon times they'd have grown enough to feed themselves and their family. Plus they had to grow a bit more for the lord of the manor or the church. There seem to be quite a lot of young people nowadays who are interested in growing their own food and how it's grown, and it all ties in with you know, environmental issues, climate change and what have you. And I also think it's just good for people to know how their food is grown, you know, and to experience all the pitfalls and the joys of it. I'm all about spreading the word. I belong to a group of smallholders locally.
Sourdough bread has been around for centuries. In fact, the oldest sourdough bread we have discovered in excavation was 5000 BC, so that's 7,000 years old. It's amazing to think that people 7,000 years ago have already made sourdough bread. And we have evidence for that. I found a beautiful picture of a loaf of bread that was made in Pompeii, the city that was burnt in the volcano eruption, and the bread was fossilized in coal. Obviously I wouldn't try and bite into it, but you can see how the baker has made the bread, how they scored the bread and placed their own stamp on the bread to mark it as their own. One of the very interesting things is looking at the community element of sourdough bread, because people made their own bread at home, and we're talking about a tradition of 7,000 years now. Not everybody had at home an oven that will bake sourdough bread. We bake sourdough bread at very high temperatures, and if you envisage old style houses, people had a stove where they made stew and they cooked for the family, but not every household had an oven. So what people used to do is make the bread at home and then take the bread to the communal oven to bake it there. So when you think about a communal oven, everybody brings their loaf to bake. How would you identify that this is your loaf and you ask the baker, oh, could you hand me that loaf? That's mine. So a tradition developed of decorating sourdough bread. And I'm sure if you're interested in bread, your Facebook feed will give you a lot of films of people who are decorating sourdough bread beautifully. So the decoration of sourdough bread, I believe, has stemmed from that tradition of trying to score the bread in a way that you can identify it and you can say, this is my loaf, would you please hand me the loaf with the leaf or with the flowers or with the X or the square? And there are different ways of scoring sourdough bread. We also, of course, score sourdough bread so that when the bread rises and the crust breaks in the process of baking, it breaks under a controlled pattern that we created, and that's why we score the bread. But scoring has different ways. You can score it as an X, you can score it as just one line and create a lovely ear. What we call an ear is that lift of the dough. You can score it as a square, but you can also decorate it. And where we are now, which is the Windmill Hill windmill, there is a baker's cottage next door to the mill. And when they renovated the cottage, they excavated ovens, and the ovens were there for the community. In fact, I had a student who came to one of my workshops who remembered the ovens still working as community ovens. People used to bring their bread to the communal oven to bake and then come later and pick it up. So I'm working with the mill in collaboration with the mill, and I will give some sourdough workshops at the mill for people who will bring their wheat to be milled here. Everybody will then go home with a milled flour to bake their own bread. We'll show them how to make it. We'll show them how to develop their own starter, which will be unique to them, and hopefully celebrate a community meal later on. So what I understand from the industrialization of making bread is, in order to make this very fluffy bread that was created and sold sliced, the bakers had to add more gluten to the bread. So the more gluten in the dough, the more fluffy and airy is your bread. And when we make sourdough bread, we encourage the gluten development by kneading the bread and then stretching the bread. There are techniques which are associated with sourdough bread. We stretch the bread, we fold it, we encourage the gluten to develop. And there is always a balance between the development of the gluten in the flour to the point where the yeast and the bacteria are starting digesting so much gluten that there isn't enough to actually hold the shape of the bread. And then some people will experience very flat bread that doesn't actually rise. So that balance between the gluten and the process is really important. And if you add more gluten to your bread, you can actually achieve a higher lift and a more fluffy, elastic bread, which is what the industrialization of bread wanted. When we make sourdough bread, we actually prefer to have a long fermentation where the yeast and the bacteria break down the proteins, because for our guts, it's easier to digest protein chains which are shorter, which are broken down already by the process of fermentation, which is why the process of fermentation is so so much healthier for us, and why sourdough bread is easier for us to digest. If you've just got a gluten intolerance, then eating sourdough bread can make a big difference to you, because the process of fermentation, and it's a long process of fermentation, breaks down the gluten chains, which are difficult for our digestive system to digest. We did a concert here at the mill. Here at the mill. We brought the piano. We actually walked the piano. Can you believe it? From home. And my husband sat here and my son gave a recital. And they gave a recital of songs about mills. So what I was going to say, that windmills were very central in people's lives. And there were hundreds of mills around the country. We now have very few left, and very few mills which are still standing and operating, like this wonderful mill at Windmill Hill. And the windmills were always central in people's life, because the mill was where the bakery was, the mill was the source of flour, the mill is where the ovens were, and it was a central place for community. In the context of the concert we did, that's probably not for your film, the miller was a central figure in the life of the village, because he was almost like he was working class, but he also had capital either to rent or buy a mill. So the young men who used to walk around the countryside and come and work at mills were always interested in the miller's daughter, because if you married the miller's daughter, you inherited the mill. Hence, there's so many romantic songs by so many composers about the miller's daughter. And we performed several of those at the concert.
And you can find Noa's course details below. This year's National Mills Weekend theme is Mills Now and Then. Many mills have been reused over time. For example, many Wealdon ironworks were powered by a water wheel, which, when the furnace stopped, became corn mills. Another example is Hog Hill, where Sir Paul McCartney has converted into a recording studio. Many industrial mills have also been converted into the ubiquitous flats and office space, and it was to document this change of use that inspired Neil Horsley to produce a book. But I started by asking him, why do people want to preserve mills?
I think that they become part and parcel of the northern landscape. In many cases they just fit in beautifully. They create what I call a millscape. And I think a lot of people have emotional connections to them. They kind of are the focal point of communities, especially the mill chimneys. They kind of define local communities. Whenever I was out photographing, people would often come up and ask me what I was doing. They always thought I was from the council, they thought I was enforcement or whatever. But when I got chatting to them, they would regale you with stories about how their grandfathers used to work in that mill, or they can remember going there as a child, or they can remember seeing it burnt down and how sad it was that it was in such a poor state. And so I think there's a real emotional bond with people for these buildings, and all the surveys that Historic England have done have said that people really, really want to see them being developed and given new life, rather than developing on greenfield land. So I think it's their architectural merit, but I think it's also the way they resonate with local people. And behind every mill scheme, there's one or two key individuals, like you say, who are very passionate, very persistent. I think sometimes it's a family connection. Certainly the Sunnybank Mills in their Leeds, that's the two guys taking that forward, William and John Gaunt, who are cousins. They're the sixth generation of their family who've been involved in that mill. And so some of them have a kind of family connection. Some of them, I think, have just seen these mills and seen them in such a poor state and just want to do something about it, and have managed to acquire them, often not quite knowing what they're going to do with them. But they're just fascinated by the industrial heritage and the kind of the potential. They do, I think, as I mentioned earlier, see themselves as custodians of these mills, and they're looking after them to then pass them on for the next generation.
How did you get involved with mills?
Well, I had a history. My background was in town planning and urban regeneration, would you believe? And that was mainly in the kind of Midlands. But I'm originally from Yorkshire. And we came back to Yorkshire about 8 years ago. And I was kind of doing freelance consultancy work. And then suddenly when COVID came along, all my work ended. I decided that I wanted to take up photography. And I joined the local camera club, Bingley Camera Club. The club decided that for their annual exhibition, it was going to be called Mills and Hills. So I've been walking past all these mills and kind of fascinated by the way that they sat in the landscape. And I thought this is a really good opportunity to actually go and see some of the mills and just, invite myself, if you like, to go and see them, to take photographs. And so there's one very close to me, one called Bent's Mill at Cullingworth that sits just above a waterfall. It's a really kind of picturesque setting. And I asked them, could I come along and take some pictures for this exhibition we're doing? And they couldn't be more welcoming. But what fascinated me was the story behind the mill. That when the couple, the couple are called Janet and John Emmanuel, they took this mill on, which had been derelict for 15 years, and over the course of the next 7 years, transformed it into holiday apartments. And it was just fascinating to hear them talk about it and the kind of passion they had and that kind of connection with it. So it occurred to me that kind of as a photography project, there were two angles to it. There was pictures of the old mills, but there was also pictures of the people, the kind of renovators, if you will, who'd actually taken on these amazing buildings and restored them and repurposed them. So that's how it happened, how it kicked off. And I thought, well, maybe I'll do one or two mills as a small project and we'll see how it goes. I'm now up to mill 36 and still going. But that led to a kind of small website, and I've got a website called mills-transform.com if people want to look at that at all. That then led to a small exhibition in a local cafe, which led to a bigger exhibition at the Industrial Museum. And finally, this book, which came out earlier this year. So it's one of these things that just kind of grown and grown.
What do you feel when you photograph a mill?
Often, I went up to one recently and you could see there was a kind of circular stone staircase with all the footwell, all the kind of treads being worn down. You think about all the kind of people who trod those steps, many of them children, I have to say. And you think of the lives often of people who worked in some of these mills and the kind of working conditions as well. So I think it does kind of connect you to the past. Some of them, especially places like Dalton Mills that have had all these arson attacks, it's so sad to see the state of them. But, as I say, there's always optimism that new life will be found for them.
Leading on from that, with the fire at an abandoned mill in Leek, how do you see the current state of mills?
Yeah, I think it's a mixed picture. I think a lot of people think that a lot of the mills have all been made into apartments, and that's maybe true in the big cities, the Manchester and the Leeds, where there's a very vibrant property market. But unfortunately, in many of the kind of Greater Manchester cotton towns and in the kind of West Yorkshire, there's lots of areas that don't have that kind of strong property market, and lots of evidence of mills that are still derelict and, as you say, open to the elements and open to arson attacks.
What is the potential for the transformation of mills? What can they become?
Many things. And what struck me is the mills I've visited, they haven't just been residential conversions, that they've done all sorts of things. They've created spaces for new buildings, for artist studios. They've been converted into academies for students. One was a classic car repair workshop. All manner of things. I think the nature of mills, because they're so large structures, they're very malleable, that they can be transformed into all manner of different kind of uses. And it surprised me how many different types of things I've come across. And the other thing that surprised me is that I thought many of the transformations would be dependent on public money, on grants, but in fact, everyone I visited, that hadn't been the case. It'd been one or two individuals who had the passion and persistence to actually take these buildings forward, and bit by bit, and these are often kind of 10, 15-year projects, incrementally, they've done up one small part of a mill, to create some workspace that creates income to then do the next part of the mill, and they kind of move around these developments and kind of stay with the project for many years.
How difficult is it for mills to retain their heritage?
Yeah, it is difficult, and there are kind of building regulations, especially after Grenfell disaster. There are kind of quite stringent regulations around. For instance, I went to one mill and they wanted to preserve a kind of old oak floor, but they've been told that they need to cover it over for fire reasons. So there are limitations, but I think many of the kind of good developers are very keen to preserve that heritage and they see themselves almost as custodians of these buildings, and they're kind of looking after them for this generation, but I'm passing them on to the next generation, and they're very much at pains to preserve as many features as they can. And I think the good schemes do that. I think they honour the past and kind of keep architectural features within the building. Or in the case, I'm thinking of Sunnybank Mills near Leeds, that they've created a kind of archive within the mill. They've involved local volunteers to gather stories from local mill workers. It's not just the physical parts of the mill that you can preserve, but it's also the history and the stories that go with them. And they've been very successful in doing that.
And finally, how do you see the future?
I think it's very positive. I think when you go back to, say, the 70s and 80s, many councils were very much keen to get rid of mills. I think that argument's now been won. I think, say, people want to see them repurposed, they want to see them given new life. People are very keen to go ahead, and when opportunities arise, then there are people who are prepared to really work hard at giving these mills new life.
And you can find Neil's website details below. Mildred, thank you very much for your time talking to me today, and we're going to be talking about the Holman Brothers of Canterbury. Now, I believe they started in about 1816, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know anything about their early history? How did they sort of get into mill writing?
Basically, they were milling engineers. There would have been other millwright companies around at the time. This particular one, they were just renowned for building 11 mills in Kent, of which I think 5 are still standing today. Mainly smock mills, and they were smock mills. The company had lots of employees, 40, 50 employees, and I think they went for 150 years.
Can I take you back to the start of Holman's? It was around 1816, so it was just after the Napoleonic Wars. What was it like at those times? Were there a lot of mill writing firms? Was it a hard industry to get into? Was it common?
I think because they were called millwrighting engineers, they managed to start up and survive. I think if it was just a millwright on his own, he'd probably find it more difficult. But I think because he had this large employment of people, he could cover all the different stages of a mill, the woodwork, the ironwork, and everything else that went with it. So they were in a good position. So I think they probably did fairly well. It was a hard life, but I think, they did well to survive, really.
So what were their mills like? I believe they were mostly smock mills.
Smock mills, yeah. Yeah, they're all wooden mills. Yeah, they didn't go into brick. I mean, the Jerusalem mill was, but all the other mills are all wooden smock mills. Whether because wood was easily available in Kent at the time, or possibly imported some of it as well, for the sales stocks.
So would their mills be typical Holman mills?
Yeah, you can spot them, yeah.
Could you describe that?
Yeah, it's just the shape of them, the cap shape and the sail shapes. Definitely Holman.
What makes them unique?
Other counties have got different regional variations. So in Lincolnshire, you've got more the onion shape, like what we call an ogee cap. In Lancashire, it's a boat shape. In Norfolk, it's boat shape. So, and in Kent, They were just a combination of both in some ways, but you can tell a Holman mill though, definitely.
So it's like an identity.
Yeah.
That is definitely
Yeah.
a Holman mill. And how many mills did they build roughly?
11.
11. And
Yeah.
how many are still available?
5. And then Kent County Council took on some of those mills as well to look after, which they've now unfortunately divested themselves of, like lots of county councils now. They're getting rid of their properties that aren't really providing a big income for them, or else they cost a lot of repair money. But no, they're still in good hands with volunteers and things.
Can we talk about perhaps one of their most famous mills, the Montefiore mill in Jerusalem? How did that come about?
To be perfectly honest, I think it was some contact that they had out there that Holman's at that time got talking to them and decided they wanted a mill, and he offered to go and build it for them, which was quite unusual really at that time. And in fact, when it was redone and repaired in Vincent's time, Vincent went over to Jerusalem to talk to the people.
It must have been quite an undertaking, you know, sort of over 100 years ago to actually go to
travel that far. Yeah, not an easy task, because I don't know whether they actually built the whole mill in the UK and transported it, or whether it was built in Jerusalem. I don't know, but the brick tower would have been built on site. But whether the sails were, I should imagine they were made over there with Holman's men. I don't know. Yeah.
moving forward to just after peak mills. So that's around 1880, 1890, when you've got, say, 18, 20,000 traditional mills up and down the country. The industry starts to decline. Holman, they diversify into agriculture and engineering.
Again, because there were millwrights and engineers, and Kent being a very sort of area for hops and crop growing, it was perhaps just almost an obvious way to go, perhaps, to get into that market, because there was ransoms at the time. But they did quite well with farm machinery. We've got lots of catalogues here of their farm machinery, so they tried to divert. I don't think it was 100% successful, but at least they tried. And and mills at the time, I say, were really getting redundant.
So we've got a final mill that they built in 1928, I believe, St Margaret's.
St Margaret's Bay, yeah.
That's quite an unusual one.
Yeah, definitely. Quite, to generate electricity, as I say, not easy. It's much easier for a water mill to actually be converted to electricity, or even corn grinding and generating at the same time. Quite a few now do that. But for a windmill, I think in Norfolk they did try to do a big project on trying to get some of the marsh windmills generating, but it just proved too complicated, so it was dropped.
Because it's quite a thing, really, because electricity was really quite modern in 1928. I mean, obviously that's when the idea, presumably, of harnessing the wind to
I mean, we've got windmills today being built just for generating electricity. They're not corn grinding, but they've actually rebuilt a mill that was gone and just built it just for generating electricity. So there's one or two of those, but apart from that, that's really it, really.
And then we come to, unfortunately, when Holman ceases trading. That's about 1975, I believe.
Yeah. It was sad that they closed down, but it was just their time was up, as it were. And even where the workshop was, it's now called Holman Muse. So the name is still there, as it were, which is nice. We got a huge amount of material and some wonderful ledgers, which when we got them were completely rotting away. But the wife of the last Holman man decided she wanted these to survive, and so she actually paid to the archive to have them repaired by a professional conservator.
What exactly is a ledger book?
So it's really the place where Holman Brothers, who are the writing firm, have recorded all the details about the work they've done for various different clients and the costs of how much they were charging. Just a way of keeping their business records, basically, of all the work that they were doing.
And how did you, as the archive, come across such a marvellous book?
So this came from the collection of Jeff Holman. So he was a descendant of the Holman family who had this millwrighting firm, Holman Brothers, for many, many years in Canterbury. And he had inherited bits and pieces of his family firm's records. And in the end, these were given to us by the Holman family. So we've got this and various other photographs, ledgers, and other records relating to the firm.
And what sort of condition was it like when you received it?
So this was actually in very bad condition. We've actually completely replaced the cover here. So it was all this old leather which was crumbling away. It turns into a kind of dust. It's called red rot, which is obviously very bad for you if you breathe it in, and gets everywhere. So we had the whole thing conserved and restored.
Oh wow. And it's all done this wonderful sort of copper plate handwriting.
Yeah, that's right.
Stuff like that. What does it sort of really give you as an archivist?
So I guess this is the very detailed technical information. So it's about things like, you know, the millwright has gone to the mill and raising the crankshaft, and other details about different things, 34 pieces of mahogany prepared and leaded, etc. So this is very precise and detailed information about the work that they were doing on these different mills and how much it was costing. Together with the other records, you can build up the kind of picture of the story of the Holman business. So this is from the 1860s, 1870s, when they were doing a lot of millwrighting work on the windmills and the water mills. And then later on, we find they moved more into a sort of the agricultural kind of engineering businesses as the traditional mills. There were fewer of them.